Good day, ladies and gentlemen. This is Watson Michael from Ceylon Institute of English and Leadership. And once again, we are honored to have Sean Kidney back with us, co-founder and CEO of Climate Bonds Initiative. Also, he's an expert advisor to governments around the world. He's a professor in practice at SOS University of London. Also, International Energy Agency's Finance Industry Advisory Board. Also, he's on so many boards, the list goes on and on. Right. Sean, welcome back. How are you doing today?
Hey, Watson, thanks for having me back. I'm good, and all the better for hearing your energetic voice.
Thank you very much. Great. So, Sean, let's talk about COP30 and what happened.
Well, there's always a couple of layers of COP, right? There's the official negotiation level, and
Mm-hmm.
every year we go in and we think, oh, there's going to be an agreement to solve the world's problems, and every year
Yeah.
there isn't. We got great public relations out of the Paris Agreement 10 years ago. It is 10 years
Mm-hmm.
ago today, by the way, that the Paris Agreement was signed. This is amazing. This is a coincidence. But it was basically public relations because it was a voluntary agreement. It wasn't mandatory. It's not a compliance agreement. It's not like passing a
Correct.
law that you have to wear your seatbelts in cars or anything like that. It's, do your best. It'd be great if you did it. Wouldn't it be good? And let's meet next year and see how it's gone. That's essentially what COPs are. But they have edged the world along so that there are
Mm.
benefits. I'm going to say, will history judge them well? Uh, I think history will judge them well in the absence of any other considered program. Look, let's face it. If we wanted things to
Mm.
really change, we needed the US, China, Europe, and then India to come to an agreement, and especially the US and China. Obama and Xi Jinping tried it. When Obama was president, it made some progress. China kept going. The US
Mm.
has gone crazy in a different
Mm.
direction, which doesn't help matters. But in the meantime, the rest of us are still doing good stuff. The discussions about carbon credits to support forest preservation in emerging markets, really important. And that will lead
Mm.
to money going to Indonesia, the Congo, Brazil, to stop to pay for the cost of stopping logging and so on. And there are lots of things like that that are happening. So the headlines are always tricky because we always want a big bang solution. Unfortunately, the world isn't configured that way yet. But what I can tell you is that of the 55,000 people that were in Belém at COP, it was the second largest COP of all in a
Wow.
place that was actually really nice. I was uncertain how to work in Belém, but they did it really well, and it's a great city. Um, Good food, by the way. It's the
Mm.
culinary capital of Brazil. Um, there
Yeah.
were only about 5,000 people on the formal negotiations. The other 50,000 people were talking about what they're doing and how they can ship things in the circles. So I gave about 20 speeches while I was there. And
Mm.
every one of those was all about the mechanics and what we're doing now and advancing it. There is a hell of a lot happening. And the COP brings all of that together. It brings the science, the finance people, the development institution people, and the government policy people to exchange ideas and learn from each other. I mean, I learned. I was in one session, which was mind blowing for me, with the Kuhn Logistics University of Zurich and an NGO from Korea who've collaborated on the future of shipping. And they
Wow.
were illuminating. I knew a little bit about new things like 40% of all global shipping is to shift fossil fuels around. And so
Mm.
as we cut down on fossil fuels, that shipping fleet's at risk. But they're providing an avenue for investors and shipping owners to say, actually, if we aggressively ship towards critical resources, we can pick up the loss from coal, bulk, we can reuse the ships. And then
Mm.
LNG containers, because we need to close down gas over the next 25 years, they can be repurposed to carry ammonia. I didn't realize that. And they've got numbers and they show the investment opportunities. And I'm thinking, wow, it was mind blowing. The work was so good. And there's so much of that around. So it's a really interesting, fascinating, energizing experience to have the chance to participate in the COP, no matter what the headlines that the newspapers report, which is no, yet again we haven't got a global agreement for the 30th year in a row.
Mm. Interesting. Well, yeah. In fact, you said you spoke in almost 20 events, and I mean, I saw on LinkedIn, like I was pretty impressed. Okay, Sean, you're here. Climate Bonds Initiative was posting on this, and there were so many things. Like, oh, I don't know, where's my book? Okay, I made a lot of points also, right? I was looking at it, I was pausing it, I was making notes, right? And some of the videos I had to go back through it again. Okay, wow. Okay, great. Okay, see, right, fantastic. Great. So now we are in a situation where geopolitical uncertainties remain. Still, some lawmakers don't support climate change. Now, how is this affecting decarbonization in the world?
Well, it's not a matter of supporting climate change or not supporting climate change. It's just happening. Like it's the
Yeah.
science. It's like gravity, right? Or the tides coming in
Mm,
and out. So when now the thing is, what people don't support or do support is the capacity to reduce the impact of it. And
okay.
that's the challenge we face. Now, I would actually say most countries are pretty well across it. I mean, the outlier is the US at the moment, who
Mm,
has gone to some kind of black hole of not believing in science.
mm,
I guess any moment now, the flat earthers will be back in charge and they'll be looking for the edge of the planet. Um, but if you put that aside, and I
yeah.
do put it aside because in all
Mm,
the conversations I had in COP, all the conversations I've had in Hong Kong, Mumbai, Tokyo, Delhi, Singapore in the last couple of months, no one's even talked about the US. People are just talking about what they're doing. We've had a
mm,
conference in Mumbai and a conference in Hong Kong, and people are just talking about all the incredible things they're doing to address climate change and to address resilience, which is the impact of
mm,
climate change coming through. Because these are material issues, right? These are no longer
mm,
academic issues. Take an example. If you had failed to anticipate the change in renewable energy in the last 20 years,
mm,
you're at the moment losing money. The coal-fired power
mm,
stations of Pakistan, of Tokyo, of Indonesia are losing money
mm,
because there is cheaper solar. Why? Because the Chinese government and the Europeans before them invested
yeah.
so much in growing solar for domestic environmental reasons, and
Mm,
they've created huge industries that, as happens if industrial development, and then on the margin exporting stuff overseas that's really cheap. There's a
yeah.
plant in Chengdu now, a solar cell
Mm,
plant that produces 640 gigawatts of solar cells every year,
wow.
largely through robots, not even people. It's not cheap labor. And the
Yeah.
bulk of that is for China because China is building solar at an unbelievable rate. Like it dwarfs
Wow.
the rest of the world. It's 50% of the world's installation of solar. So they're going green. They're going green really
Mm,
fast. And then what that happens is the offcuts, if you like, from the factory then get sent to Sri Lanka, and Sri Lankan people get really cheaper and cheaper and cheaper solar cells. In Pakistan
mm,
right now, the reason the coal-fired power company is losing money is because they haven't been able to provide consistent energy. Now, there are blackouts still. And so people are just
mm,
putting solar cells in the roofs. Solar is
mm,
booming, unbelievable
yeah.
solar, and electric vehicles. Did you know last year, a quarter of all cars sold in Pakistan were electric? In
Mm,
Pakistan.
wow.
That's not
Wow.
Germany. That's not China. That's
Yeah.
Pakistan. And they plug them
Yeah.
in to solar cells on the roofs. This is a change that's happening around the world. So if you're in a business exposed to this sort of stuff, you've
Mm,
got to take action. You've got to change. I mean, for example, if you're supplying carburetors to the auto industry in Tokyo, you're toast because in 10
yeah.
years that's going to go on. So what's your
Mm,
transition plan? If you're a company that's supplying diesel generators in Pakistan and probably in Sri
mm-hmm.
Lanka too, you might not have a future because people are shifting to cheaper solar stuck on rooftops all over the place
Mm,
and just plugs. There are people running fleets of two-wheelers all across Africa right now that have just got
yeah.
a couple of solar cells on top of the roof and a couple of plugs, and they bring the electric two-wheeler, they plug it into the, and you know what? Their running costs are a quarter of using petrol. And so they're just changing really quickly. And you have hospitals that are putting solar on the roof and a battery, and that's actually cheaper than diesel costs to go up and down and up and down. So, it's not going to happen next year, but it's going to happen in the next few years if you're exposed to the old industries, you got to think of a new business plan. And that's really what's going on around the world. And that's what the COP's dealing with. And no amount of huffing and puffing in Washington, D.C. can change that now. It's too late. It's already happening and already underway. So we talk about transition. We talk about, transition to low carbon, but really transition to take advantage of the business opportunities that are now baked. The revolution's underway. And also, because they've been a bit late addressing climate change, transition to addressing climate impacts. If you're not looking at climate impacts, you're a higher risk of default for a lender. If you do look at climate impacts and plan around them, like coastal property in Colombo, if you're managing that coastal property and being aware of the likelihood of storm surges and floods and so on, and taking steps to make sure you can keep operating and you're not washed out for 6 months, then clearly your lenders are going to be happier. And that's the big new thing at the moment. So yeah, it's transition, mate. It's everything.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now,
Yeah,
under your
I mean, look,
leadership,
sorry, I didn't answer your question directly. What
okay.
geopolitical uncertainties? I'm going to say our politicians are still coming to grips with this. Our central banks have that understand, including the Sri Lankan Central Bank. They understand this sort of stuff. They're baking it in. Our politicians are struggling with short-term issues and long-term issues and so on. But I do know that your Prime Minister has, your government is thinking about these issues in Sri Lanka. And the question is what it can do and how it can get capital to make the changes, to invest the right kind of changes. And of course, that's where green bonds and climate bonds come in.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, under your leadership, Climate Bonds initiative has developed a lot. And you have been a huge part of the global green bond market, which is about 3 trillion at the moment. How is the market these days?
Well, it's 6.5 trillion now, Watson.
Oh,
That's an old figure.
okay. All right, my
That's
bad.
US
Okay.
dollar. That's
Okay, yeah.
US dollars, not Singapore dollars. So
Okay.
it's a big market and it keeps growing. So the
Yeah.
market is strong. It's in fact in China this year it grew 50%. That's a real growth
Wow.
rate.
50%.
So this is still on a strong upward trend. I mean, the green. I should be precise. The 6.5 trillion is the sustainable bond market.
Okay.
So within that, green, which are to things like solar or electric transport, which is about 4.5 trillion. There is sustainable bonds, which are a mixture of social and sustainable. There's also social bonds, which generally go to making society stronger in one way. We call those climate resilience bonds. So when we talk about climate resilience, and this, we've got a world now of volatility. Weather's going to go nuts in the future. We're going to get a lot of crazy things happening. We have to prepare. So part of that is infrastructure and preparing, making sure the port in Colombo and in Batikalo and other places is better able to deal with storm surges, more severe storms, flood, sea level rises and stuff like that. And rainfall, we're going to get much more. The monsoons are going to become more intense and they're going to disappear in breaks like that. It's going to be up and down. But the social implications. So when we have crises and disasters, a lot of people get dislocated, a lot of businesses get shocked. And there's a lot of social implications. How do we prepare for that to make sure that we can get up and get back to work the next morning rather than be stuck for 6 months not being able to earn a living? And that's social resilience for climate resilience. Now, that's everything from making sure there's public housing so everyone can have some kind of housing afterwards, then have to rebuild a place, or maybe it's a matter of rethinking housing. I don't know. All I know is we've got to address that question. We've got to make sure there are rainy day funds so we can distribute money quickly when there's an emergency. We've got to make sure that our water systems can deal with these kinds of crises without becoming totally polluted or failing to give water, which is going to happen at the moment in the Ganga up in India when the monsoon fails 1 in 5 years. So all of these things are important to keeping our social and our economic fabric together with a lot of crises. So there's a lot of stuff that's contributing to the growth of the market. So in this green, sustainable and social market together, we're at 6.5 trillion. Pretty big. I mean, that's a lot
Wow.
bigger than the Sri Lankan economy.
I think it's much bigger than the Sri Lankan, Indian and
Yes,
Pakistan and Maldives economy as well. Okay, right.
exactly
Yeah,
right. Thanks for the perspective, Watson.
sure. So the Tokyo Metropolitan Government issued the world's first climate bond certified using the resilience criteria and
Yep.
taxonomy. Can you explain that to us?
So they're doing a whole lot of work on resilience. They're preparing, just like Colombo has to, just like Delhi has to, just like Lahore has to. They have been widening their drains because what you're going to get in, what you are getting already in Tokyo are much more severe typhoons, which means much bigger winds and much bigger dumps of rain, floods. And there are droughts in between, by the way. That's another problem. But at the moment, let's look at that. So they've been widening stormwater drains. They've created a huge underground cavern underneath Tokyo, very deep, to soak up floodwater in a really severe rain, and they collect it rather than flooding the streets and washing away cars. It's amazing engineering.
Wow.
Washington, D.C. has also done this about 10 years ago. So it's known engineering, but Tokyo's is huge. And then they can use that water afterwards. They can take it out of the underground reservoir and pump it back into the water management system slowly but surely once the floods subside. They've done things like their electric power lines, they put them underground so that in a big wind they don't get blown over. That's a resilience strategy. There's a whole bunch of things like that they're doing, and they're funding that with a bond, a climate resilience bond. 300 million euros. They issued it in Europe. It was 7 times oversubscribed. That is, they had 7 times as many buyers as bonds to place, and they got a significant price benefit on their old bonds, 5 basis points, which in Tokyo is a lot. It's because the bond prices are so tight. So they're very, very happy, and they've committed to doing more of these. And we're now seeing other municipalities in Japan starting to look at this. I want to stress it's not actually the first bond devoted to resilience, because there have been some bonds for water specifically. The Tokyo one's a broad gamut, but Cape Town issued a bond in the middle of their drought a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, which was for water infrastructure in the context of climate change. So there's stuff like that that's been happening, but this is the first time it's been certified with the new resilience criteria. And we want to use this to encourage, well, certainly municipalities all around the world to get their act together. Learn from Tokyo. We need to plan.
Absolutely, Sean. It's a very important thing because my next question for you was water has become vital. Okay, so many countries, including emerging markets, do not have proper water storage systems, especially during the rainy season. So how can this be addressed?
Well, this is a known issue. In Sri Lanka over the last couple of
Mm.
thousand years, we've created water systems all over the place to store water and to be able to have it in droughts and so on, to capture the monsoons they come. We've created irrigation systems which efficiently use water when we are wasting water before, and they become more and more efficient over time. There's a lot we've done. All that's changing is that the nature of rainfall patterns are becoming more volatile and more severe. So we've got to improve what we've done. But we're not actually starting from scratch. We can learn from 2,000 years of history. If you start looking at some of the ancient sites all around South Asia, I was in Ahmedabad last year and visiting. And there's a tourist resort which is one of the old water systems where you go down 1,000 steps into the ground and so on. And it's amazing the engineering that was done in that case 1,000 years ago. And you're sort of looking, we need to not so much rediscover, because we've got to do much bigger because we've got so many more people and so on, but we need to rediscover that focus and that intent. And that's all we're talking about, really. But to do that, you've got to understand a bit about the future. And one thing that we do have now that we didn't have as much 1,000 years ago is amazing predictive capability. We now have a very good idea of what's going to happen, what's likely to happen, nothing certain in life, likely to happen with water, with storms over the next 30 years. So we can plan for it. Now, that means we've got to make sure there's enough water infrastructure, enough water available for our people. That's going to require a lot of recycling, by the way, because there are going to be longer droughts. And in those droughts, the only solution is to make sure we don't waste and we don't shed, and that we reuse wherever we can. At the very minimum, our wastewater has got to be filtered to be used for agriculture, for example. But really, Singapore is the poster child here. If you go into a 7-Eleven store in Singapore and you buy a bottle of water, it comes straight out of the waste stream. It's 100% recycled, because they've had geopolitical problems. You know, Malaysia tried to cut off water supply to them at one point. So they've recycled everything. And that's the way we need to go if we're going to be resilient and not be at risk of these weather crises going forward. You know, I'm not saying we need to do that in Sri Lanka tomorrow, by the way, because we have significant water resources, or in southern India, or in southern Pakistan or Bangladesh. But we do need to do that in northern India and northern Pakistan and places like that. We need to be thinking much more carefully about how we use, how we manage, how we keep clean the water that is, you know, the source of our life.
Brilliant. Okay, well articulated. Okay, Sean, any final message from you to our viewers and listeners out there?
The future is going to be very, very different to the past because of the problems we've created, humans. We didn't know, but we weren't aware of them. We didn't listen to our scientists, but whatever. You know, we've built our civilization on fossil fuels, on utilization of the natural environment, on certain kinds of farming. But we do know now, this is where science has been incredible, what the problems are of that. We need to act and change how we do things. We've done a lot of things to change how we do things in the last few years. You know, one could argue the Green Revolution, which was science being brought to bear farming, has had such a dramatic effect on South Asia by increasing yields and able to feed themselves, when certainly in the 1960s, India was a net importer of food, and now it's a major exporter, for example. Well, we're at that point in history. Listen to the science and figure out what to do next. And that's where we're at, but it's happening. In energy, it's well and truly underway. In transport, in industrial sectors, and in lots of agricultural sectors, this revolution's underway. If you're young and you're full of energy and you're aware the world is changing, the opportunities are immense.
Absolutely. Sean, thank you very much for taking time and doing this valuable podcast with us.
Thank you, Watson, for having me again.
It's an absolute honor.